You are listening to Fox Radio 910 and 104.3. I want to welcome you to Let's Talk About, our weekly radio program sponsored by Crowning Touch Senior Moving Services of Roanoke, Virginia. My name is Linda Balentine, the president of Crowning Touch and your host for this series. I interview local characters, service providers, politicians, teachers, entrepreneurs, and business professionals, and each one is dedicated to improving life in our valley. Every person has an interesting perspective to share from all walks of life. So, let's begin today's interview. I'm excited about doing this interview today because I have the privilege of talking with Tony Atkinson, the senior pastor of New Life Christian Ministries. Tony, you recently celebrated your 50th wedding anniversary with your wife, Sharon, and together the two of you have been dedicated pastors for 50 years. That is such a special calling. Share with me how God got your attention.
Well, thank you. I will. Thank you for having me today, by the way. Thanks, yeah. Linda. And we welcome everybody that's joining with us this morning. You know, when you keep throwing out that number 50, it makes me feel so old. I remember I thought when my dad turned 50, I really felt sorry for him because I thought he was going to die, you know. But now that, 50 years. But anyway, to answer your question, it's really a long story, you know, and don't want to bore you with a bunch of details. But first of all, I always like to tell people I was raised in a Christian home. Yeah. And I can't tell you the value.
Yeah, you were blessed.
Of a Christian foundation. Now, I didn't live it.
Right.
I grew up like all the other kids. I grew up in the 70s. It was a big drug deal, and all my buddies were in Vietnam. And when I was in high school, and they introduced me to stuff they shouldn't have, and I got into a mess. But, you know, when I finished high school, I didn't know what to do. I was going to join the Air Force, and I went to Christiansburg, and I met with the recruiter. And he said, son, we don't need you. We're shutting down Vietnam. He said, I suggest that you go on to college and find you a career and don't worry about joining the Air Force. I've always wanted to be a pilot. Yeah. But anyway, so I went to Bluefield State College to be a band director because I was a trumpet major in high school and marching band all through Roanoke, Salem, Benton, Blacksburg, Christiansburg, you know, all the stuff. Yeah. And so anyway, I started at Bluefield State College in the music program. And I came home one weekend, and I had long blonde hair. I was on my chopper motorcycle, had my little leather vest on, and my brother and I had him on the back of my bike. We rode up to this little country store in Shawsville. That's where I was raised. And I walked in, and I lit up a cigarette. And I walked in, and my cousin was there with another girl from Georgia. They had come in from Georgia to visit there in Shawsville, and that's where I met my wife. I saw the prettiest girl I'd ever seen.
So that was Sharon.
Oh, Sharon, yeah. She's long blonde hair, Georgia tan, green eyes. I mean, it was a knockout. And I bought me a Pepsi, and I was smoking a cigarette. And my cousin said, hey, Tony, I want you to meet Sharon. I said, hey, it's great to meet you. And you know what? We both fell in love at that moment.
That is the wildest. That's how it's supposed to happen.
So she goes back to Georgia.
Right.
I go back to West Virginia, and we used to write these things called letters.
Yeah.
You know, most of your listeners know what a letter is, but most of these kids don't. No texting, no cell phones, no email. It was handwritten letters. We did that for a year or so. And all of a sudden, I decided she lived in Franklin Springs, Georgia. Her dad was the dean of students at our denominational Christian school there. And I decided to take my music major, and move it to Emmanuel College. I was basically chasing Sharon.
Right.
So I had to get that Georgia peach, you know. And so anyway, I go to Georgia, and I'm going to school there. It's a Christian school, and I'm not a Christian. That poses a problem for me and them because I had real long hair. I didn't come from a Christian scene. I was into a bunch of stuff I shouldn't have been. In fact, just a side note, her daddy was the dean of students. He kicked me out for doing drugs out of a Christian college.
Right, no kidding.
That's not a good way to start.
See, no, but look at all that God has done. Keep on talking.
Well, okay. Well, here's where the story changes. So he said, I'm going to kick you out for a quarter. If you change and you make me a promise that you won't do that anymore. I was smoking and doing other stuff I shouldn't have. he said, and if you get your parents to write you a letter, I'll let you come back to school, provided you behave. Well, anyway, in this Christian college, every semester they had a special speaker. They called them revivals back in those days. We'd do a fall revival and a spring revival. Well, he let me back in the spring, and I went to church. Wow. I'm sitting on the back row. I've got Sharon, and all my buddies are around me. And this guy, I couldn't tell you to this day who he was. All I know is he gave an altar call at the end of service.
Wow.
Okay, so I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, I start shaking. And I'm trying to stop. I'm trying to be cool because I'm surrounded by my buddies. You know how that is. Yeah. I'm trying to be cool in front of Sharon. And all of a sudden, my legs are just bent. I can't stop. Yeah. And it felt like a sledgehammer. When he gave the altar call, a sledgehammer hit me in the chest.
Wow.
I started bawling.
Oh.
And he said, listen, if you want to get saved, I want you to leave your seat. You know, the Billy Graham stuff. Leave your seat. Come up front. We're going to pray with you. I mean, I hit that middle aisle of that church in front of all those. It was a packed out place. All my buddies are there. And I was kind of the ringleader, you know. And anyway, I go to the altar and I cried so loud. I was so embarrassed, but I couldn't stop. And I said, Lord, forgive me of my sins. Come into my heart. And if you want me to go into the ministry, I've been fighting it.
No
I knew it was coming. I couldn't stop it. Even as a kid, I used to line up little rocks and preach to them, you know, with my little Bible. Remember the little King James Bible? Yeah, the little teeny ones? Anyway, I knew I was called in the ministry. I just didn't want to do it. But anyway, the night I got saved, I said, Lord, I'll do whatever you tell me to do. And in 1974, April the 4th, I've been trying to do that ever since. So I got saved a long, long time ago.
Right.
And so then, obviously, when I got saved, I entered into the School of Christian Ministries at the college that trains leaders and pastors.
Right.
Well, I went there and I graduated in 1977. And Sharon and I were married in 75. So we lived off campus for 2 years. But when I finished the School of Christian Ministries, Pastor Walter Lee Wood from this church that we're recording in today called me and he said, would you like to come to Roanoke and work as my youth pastor? And if you do a good job, we might even keep you on. Because I had to do an internship to qualify for graduation. It's a 3-month internship. I said, Pastor Wood, I'd be delighted. So we packed up 2 Pintos. You remember what a Ford Pinto looked like?
Sure I do.
Yeah. So anyway, we packed up 2 Ford Pintos from Georgia, moved all of our stuff to Roanoke. They got us an apartment on Hirschberger Road. And so Sharon and I started here. I was a youth pastor. She was children's church pastor.
Wow.
Well, again, the promise was if you do a good job, we'll keep you on.
Was it called New Life then?
No, it was called the First Pentecostal Holiness Church of Roanoke. It was during that year, we had a board meeting. You got me off track, but bring me back to that story. That's okay. We had a board meeting. And I said, guys, I was a real young kid, you know, I'm like 20, 21, just got saved and didn't know any better. So I met with the board here and I said, let's change the name of our church. I said, First Pentecostal Holiness doesn't say anything to our community.
Right.
And I said, they said, well, what do you suggest? I threw out a ton of names. We all talked about them. And anyway, we decided New Life Temple. New life because of the new birth, the new life God brings you.
Right.
Temple because our bodies are a temple.
Oh, okay.
And we bounced that around, took it before the congregation. Lo and behold, they voted to change the name. So it has been New Life since the late 70s. Right. But New Life Temple, we changed it when I got here in 2006 to New Life Christian Ministries because we were branching out. Yeah. So anyway, back to the story.
Right.
So Walter Lee invites me here. He said, hey, if you do a good job, we'll keep you on. Obviously, we did the best we could, and I became his associate pastor. Interestingly enough, he had 2 live radio broadcasts going on that we would go to over KBA and another radio station I don't think is no longer here. And he said, how'd you like to do radio? I said, I'd love to. He turned both of those programs. I did them live every day. We spun the albums and I'd read scripture and give a devotion.
Wow.
That was fun. Anyway, that's an important part because my story later on involves radio. So anyway, we served here for a couple of years, and then Pastor Wood was elected as superintendent or bishop over a 3-state area. The first thing he did, he came back, he said, Tony, how would you like to pastor a church? I said, I think I'd like to.
I think I'm ready.
I felt like I was. I said, where's it at? And he said, Belpre, Ohio. I said, no, sir, I'm not interested in that at all. I'm a Southern boy. I was born in Roanoke on the old Memorial Hospital downtown, and my dad worked at Road Furniture and GE. And I said, I'm from the mountains of Virginia. I don't want to move to Ohio. He said, would you pray about it? I said, sure, I'll pray about it, but I can tell you now, it ain't going to happen. And so, crazy thing, when you pray about it, I said, Pastor Wood, he was superintendent then over 3 states. And I said, would it be okay if we jumped in your car and Sharon and I drove with you to this place in Ohio so we can take a look? Well, in the meantime, he tells me the story. It was a church that had started. They borrowed $140,000, built the shell of the building. The pastor had a nervous breakdown and resigned. So the 25 or 30 people he had, they closed down for over a year, so they dispersed. And Pastor Wood was telling me this horror story. And anyway, when we went to Belpre, I got out of that car and I walked around that little bitty, it was a small church, small sanctuary. And I prayed. I said, God, I told you when I got saved, I'd do whatever you said for me to do. And if this is my assignment, you let me know. The strangest, weirdest little voice said, this is it. We didn't have any people. The church had been shut down for over a year. And so the building was incomplete. It didn't have tile or carpet, needed paint, things like that. So I got in there. I came out and I told Sharon, I said, hey, listen, I really felt like God spoke to me. Most wives would say, no way. My wife is so cool. She said, listen, I told you when I married you, wherever God sends you, I'll go. And I said, okay, we're moving to Ohio. So we came back to Roanoke. This church received a love offering and sent us off. And we moved up there. My wife's 8 months pregnant. And we landed in this little town called Belpre, Ohio. It's just across the river from Parkersburg, West Virginia, right on the Ohio River. Belpre, not Belfree. And so anyway, everybody said, oh, you pastored in Belfree. No, it's Belpre. Yeah. And so anyway, we started working there. And the first service, we had 3 people. 2 of them just came to give me the keys from the last pastor. The one guy was actually in the house that they called the parsonage. So I had 3 people there that first service, and we started working. We stayed up there for 2 years. I did everything I knew to do. I did everything they told me in Bible school to cause a church to grow. Nothing happened. At the end of 2 years, we only had 8 people.
Wow.
And
I mean, you stayed alive.
I knocked on doors. I witnessed. I passed out brochures, and we just never had nobody. Nobody showed any interest. But at the end of that second year, I told Sharon I was beat. I was tired. I was defeated. I said, "Oh gosh, I've missed God here. I'm not supposed to be here, and I'm sorry." And she was homesick. We had a little toddler. My parents are here in the Roanoke area. Her parents were in Georgia. We didn't know a soul. We were lonely. We were broken. And I told Sharon, it was a cold January, and I said, listen, if nobody comes tonight, we're going back to Virginia. Sharon said, praise God, because she wanted to get out of there anyway. It was just lonely. It's a terrible time when you don't know anybody.
Well, what happened?
Well,
I can't wait to hear what happened.
Okay, so this Sunday night was D-Day. I told God and I told Sharon, if nobody comes tonight, we're going back to Virginia.
Right.
But God, if you'll send one person, I'll stay.
Oh my gosh.
Now, listen, that doesn't sound like a lot, but it was a miracle because nobody had been coming on Sunday nights. So if anybody showed up, it'd be a miracle. Anyway, at 7:00, I looked at my watch. We've got the lights on, the heat on in the sanctuary. It's January. It's spitting snow. It's terrible cold. And I said, baby, nobody's here. So we're going back to Virginia. I mean, I was one whipped puppy. I was defeated. I was discouraged. And I'm not the kind of guy that gets that way. I can tackle hell with a water pistol. I'm just not afraid to do anything. But 2 years is a long time.
Yeah.
And we weren't happy. We didn't know anybody. We'd done the best we could. It hadn't worked. So anyway, I said, let's get out of here.
So nobody showed up.
Nobody showed up.
Okay.
7 o'clock. So we're on our way out. I'm turning down the heat, turning off the lights in the sanctuary, the hallways. We go to a big solid metal door to the back door of the church. And I'm tying Melanie. Melanie's 2 years old. I'm tying her little hood on because it's freezing. And we just lived across the parking lot into this little migrant worker's house. And I was tying her hood, and all of a sudden we heard a car door. It's about 5 after 7. Both of us froze. We're like, oh my God, could that be a human being? Yes, it was. One lady. God didn't send me 5. He didn't send me 3. One lady walked in. Her name was Kathleen French. She was from Canada. Her and her husband had just moved down to Belpre because he worked in one of the big chemical plants. Mm-hmm. She walked in. She was one of those ladies, kind of reminds me of you. She was just on fire, happy, had a big 30-pound Bible. She walked in. She went, oh, it's freezing, isn't it? Sharon and I are in shock because I just told my wife we're moving back to Virginia. And now, God.
But you had told God one person.
One person. What an idiot.
Yeah, it was your deal.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I couldn't even blame this one on God.
That's right.
I said, one lady, sure enough, one person, one lady shows up. And she was the kind of person that she was so positive, so happy. She walks in. She goes, well, praise God. She goes, hi, I'm Kathleen French. And I just moved down from Canada, and I'm looking for a good church. I'm in shock. And I wanted to say, hey, I am too. I'm looking for a good church too. Anyway, I just wanted to hit her. She was so happy. And I was so sad, defeated, whipped. I'm about half angry now. Now, God's answered that prayer, and I'm in trouble because I've always been taught if you made a promise to God, if you made a vow, you better keep it.
Yeah.
Well, oh man, I'm in real deep trouble. So we chatted a little bit, and I looked at Sharon. I said, could you take Kathleen over to the house and have a cup of coffee? I'll be there in a little bit. I wasn't in no mood for fellowship.
Right.
I needed to get by myself because now
you need to figure it out.
The stage has changed.
Right.
So they finally left. I locked the door, and I went in that little church office. I said, God, I know I told you that I'd stay, but I don't have it in me. I can't do this anymore. I've tried everything I know. It hasn't worked. And I began to, and I'm not a crier. I know it sounds like I am, but I began to cry like a baby. I said, God, I need some help.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. And I opened my Bible. I just opened my Bible, and it opened to Matthew 16, where Jesus said, I will build my church. Now, I don't know how to explain this. It's really hard to put it into words. But when I read those 5 words, I felt them go into my spirit.
Right.
I will.
So he refreshed your vision.
Oh, he didn't refresh it. He gave me vision. I didn't have one before. I didn't know what a vision was. I mean, you got to remember, this is in the late 70s. Nobody ever heard about vision, mission, purpose. I'm just trying to find some human beings to come to church.
Right.
Okay, so I got a pencil and a paper, and I began to write down exactly what he spoke to me. He spoke to me, church planting. I didn't even know what a church plant was in the 70s. Radio station, Bible college, Christian school, Christian bookstore.
Wow, he did give you a vision.
And I'm writing this down on a legal pad between tears and sneezing and snotting around saying, oh, God. And so anyway, when I finished, I said, Lord, okay, I'm here, but you've got to do it. But what he told me, here's the important part. When he said, I will build my church, mistakenly, I thought he told me to build it.
Right.
And I can't build the church. No man can. And I'd done the best I could. And I think I needed those 2 years to die. I really do. I think God needed to say, because I'm real hard-headed, I'm real sure of myself, God needed me to see that my best just didn't work.
Right.
And if he said, if you'll let me drive, if you'll just do what I tell you to do, I'll grow this church. Well, okay. So the next Sunday, I've got 5 people in church. But you know what? They had a new pastor.
Yeah.
I went in there. I was excited.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm so glad y'all came today. I didn't tell them anything what had happened. But you know what? Our church began to grow immediately. It was the craziest thing. We went from 5 to 8 people. That, by the way, that earlier 8 people was me, Sharon, and my daughter included. Right. So it went from 5 to 8 to 12. It went up to 15. I'm like, man, this is awesome. 20, 25. When we hit 30, let me tell you a great story. Do you know about the Full Gospel Businessmen's?
Yes.
Well, anyway, it's an old association.
Yes,
back in the 70s, the businessmen and communities would meet, and they would have guys come in and pray for people. And anyway, a bunch of Methodist people went to a Full Gospel Businessmen's meeting, and they all received the Holy Spirit. The Methodist church there asked them to leave because they had been filled with the Holy Spirit. They didn't know what to do with that. Right. So anyway, in 1 week, we were at 30 people. Next week, 30 more come in at one time. We went from 30 to 60. We went from 60 to 70 to 90 to 100 to 125. Now, I'm telling you this over a period of a year.
Sure.
And at 125, we sold our pews and bought chairs because that made more room. We went to 2 services. We got to 300. We built a new sanctuary in Belpre that held 750. We filled it up. And in the meantime, we began to take men and women that God had called into ministry that was a part of our church, and we began to plant or start other churches out of this mother church. And we ultimately planted 10 churches in different cities around our little community.
And that was all before you got here. But I need you to...
no, we're not even close to coming here yet.
Well, I know, but I need to talk about New Life. So
okay,
I need you to
let me hurry up. Let me tell you what happened. So anyway, we're up there, and all of a sudden, we start a radio station. It expanded into 4 radio stations.
Wow.
So I've been a general manager of radio stations, a pastor of a mother church and 10 satellite churches. And then I became a superintendent over 8 states. Our denomination wanted me to start a new conference. Well, it was at that time, after all of that had happened, 28 years in Ohio, the Lord spoke and said, I want you to go to Roanoke.
Wow.
This church had gotten into some trouble. They had lost most of their people. They were down about 60, 70 people here.
Right.
They couldn't make the payments on the property. And the church board asked me to stop by and preach one Sunday morning. And I did on the way to Myrtle Beach. I had no intentions of taking this church. I'm going to Myrtle Beach.
Well, I sure am glad you did.
Well, anyway, they said, would you be interested in taking it? We don't have any money to pay you because we can't even make our mortgage payments.
Wow.
And I said, well, I'll do whatever God says. But it was in this service that I'm preaching at that God said, I want you to come to Roanoke. So we started out in Roanoke in 2006. We had about 60 people in that big old sanctuary. I mean, you talk about an empty looking shell.
Right.
No worship leader, no children's church, no youth pastor, nothing. It was just Sharon and I. And so we got here, and I really believed that God was going to take us to 1,000. Now, these folks had never seen 1,000. They had seen probably 400-ish. But I'm talking regular attendance.
Sure.
And not special occasions, but every Sunday. And I said, I believe God's going to take us to 1,000 here. I want y'all to agree. Pray with me and agree. We can do this. We began to work with them. We hired a worship leader part-time. We borrowed a children's church pastor. I mean, we just trying to build, restructure.
Sort of cobbled it together.
Revitalize a church that had been dropped down to nothing. And you know what? Over 5 years, God took us from 60 to over 1,000. And here's the exciting part. They were all new converts.
Yeah.
We didn't take anybody from other churches. We didn't go after anybody from other churches. And God saved people. I would teach on tithing and people would get saved. It wasn't even about salvation. Give an altar call. Whole families were coming up at one time. Mama, daddy, and all the little kids. It was awesome.
Wow.
And so God, we've been here for 20 years, almost 20 years in October. And that completes our 50. 2 before, 2 in Roanoke, 28 in Belpre, 20 here. That's 50 years.
Right. And now, as a matter of fact, now you are actually planning, well, you call yourself an Ephesians 4 church.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And that means you are at the stage now of your life where you are discipling another pastor.
Right.
And he is going to take over in July. And you are, quote unquote, retiring, but that doesn't mean you're leaving the scene.
No.
Good.
Well, July the 2nd is my 72nd birthday. So I figure 50 years is long enough. You know, one of the things, Linda, that some pastors do, and I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just kind of, this is something that was important to me. Some pastors stay way past their time. Right.
I got you.
You know what I'm saying? They take the church downhill instead of up.
Yeah, I got you. But I want to keep talking about this because we're going to make this a 2-segment show because we're just getting rolling now.
Yeah, we're just getting rolling up
We just now the doors are now open.
Yay!
We just opened the doors, and I want to talk about several things in our next session. I want to talk about some of the biggest challenges facing the churches today,
okay,
and what is happening here in this church. I want to talk about how technology has changed the face of the ministry in general in the last 10 or 15 years. But for right now, I'm just going to thank you for leading us up to this place. Okay, this is part A of a 2-part show that we're going to do.
Wonderful.
And we're just going to have everybody join us next week. And then we're going to be talking about all the great dynamic things that are happening right here. So thank you for joining us. And we'll connect.
Thank you for having me.
We'll connect with you next week.
You've been listening to Let's Talk About, courtesy of Crowning Touch Senior Moving Services of Roanoke, Virginia, the only moving company with a consignment shop, auction house, and real estate division. We are a one-stop shop for any senior making a move. Check out our website at crowningtouchusa.com. Or if you are planning a move, call Anna at 540-982-5800 to arrange a free estimate. And don't forget to check out our monthly browse and bid auctions at 6712 Williamson Road in Roanoke, where you can bid online on over 1,800 items each month. Meanwhile, let's get back together next Friday at noon for more of Let's Talk About on Fox 910 and 104.3.